In 4 years of me doing this job now, a common question that I often get across Instagram, in my DMs, live Q&As either here on YouTube or on Instagram, and certainly in one-on-one coaching sessions is, how do I generate £1,000, for example, in passive income through my investment portfolio? And almost in every instance, there is an omission of a very important question. How much money do I need? How much capital in order to generate £1,000 a month or £500 a month in passive income? And that's what I want to talk about today. Now, I've already alluded to the most obvious question that is often missed around the fact that you need capital and how much capital do you need within your investment portfolio to generate an income of, say, £1,000 per month. And £1,000 per month doesn't sound like a lot. It's a number that I hear quite often bandied around, £1,000 a month. But when you extrapolate that over the course of the year, you're looking at £12,000 for the year. And so in order to understand what the final capital amount needs to be, you also need to understand what is a good dividend yield. Now, a dividend yield is a percentage that shows how much of a dividend a company pays in relation to its share price. So let's do this as an example. Now, let's just say you've got company A with a share price of £100. And let's just say this company per year pays a dividend of £3 per share. Well, that will give you a dividend yield of 3%. Now, in the investment world, a dividend yield of anywhere between 2 and 5 is deemed as a good dividend yield. If you can find companies that will have, 5% at the top echelons, obviously your capital amount will be much, much lower. The amount you're going to need is going to be lower because you've got a higher dividend yield. But let's use this example of 3% being the dividend yield. And let's just say you need £12,000 per year, which is £1,000 per month. There is a formula you can use. This is the formula right here. All you basically do is you divide your income requirement by the dividend yield. And in this example, you're going to need £400,000 in capital in an investment portfolio to generate that level of income. Now, I'm pausing there purely because when I've had these kind of conversations with people, either in a group or one-on-one sessions, or even in Q&A sessions, often people get surprised at the size of capital, the amount of capital that is required to generate a seemingly small amount of money, £1,000 per month. It rolls off the tongue, £1,000 a month. But actually, the capital requirement is quite large in people's eyes. And so what is worthwhile talking about here is, and this is a question as well, is this the right approach for someone who may be just starting out or may not have the capital? Is dividend investing the right approach? And look, let's try and tackle that question together. What type of investor goes to invest for a dividend or a passive income of, say, £1,000 per month? The first, and no prizes for this one, is an income seeker. You may be at that stage of life where you actually need to generate an income because you may be looking to slow down, retire, semi-retire. Your circumstances have changed. You want to take a back seat, you want to be able to relax a little bit more, enjoy the fruits of your labor. So income seekers, this will match and be suitable for quite nicely. The second might be a conservative investor. So when we say conservative investor, this is the type of investor that perhaps doesn't necessarily want to be invested in growth stocks. Their risk profile is probably a little bit more balanced, maybe on the cautious side. And all they essentially are looking for is they're looking for strong, established businesses that have been around for a while that pay a dividend. And it's really important to note that the type of companies that pay a dividend are often companies that are more established. Why? Because a dividend can only be paid from a company that is making profits. And it is a company decision to pay dividends. Not all companies who make profits actually pay dividends. An example of that is Tesla. Tesla has been in profit for a while, but they choose not to pay dividends. They choose to reinvest that money into the business in opposed to sharing that profits with their shareholders. The third kind of investor that this might actually suit might be the long-term investor who is interested in having their dividends reinvested into their portfolio. And this type of investor is very, very different from the first one where they're looking for income. This type of investor, as a long-term investor, is essentially looking for dividend paying companies, and in addition to any share price appreciation that might happen, they're also looking to get their dividends, reinvest. So it's almost like a double bubble, almost, if you will, where you get, yes, the share price appreciation, and it may not be as attractive as growth stocks, for example, but you're still going to get that share price appreciation. But the dividend being reinvested helps compound their growth even further. So those are three profiles that this type of investing might actually suit. What I think is worthwhile talking about, though, is if you are going to be using ETFs, what type of ETFs might you be looking for? And what are the things to look out for within ETFs if this is the approach that you actually want to take? Now, ETFs are a really good way to access companies that are actively paying dividends. However, there are some key considerations that you need to bear in mind when selecting a dividend paying ETF. The first one is the fund performance history. Now, we all know that past performance is no indication to future performance, so it can't be used as a reliable barometer as to whether or not this ETF will be successful moving forward. But one of the things that you can garner from the past performance of an ETF is, number one, the type of companies that are in there and how stable that dividend payment has actually been. Because with an ETF, it's a collective, right? It's a collective investment almost. So you're going to have a couple of hundred dividend paying companies within that. And this is an added bonus because not only are you taking the risk of perhaps selecting 2 or 3 companies that are currently paying dividends, and because circumstances might change economically, the company either decides to cut their dividends, reduce it, for example, or stop dividends altogether. Within an ETF, you're going to have a couple of hundred companies. And this is an ETF that is going to be managed ongoing for you to ensure that those companies that are in the ETF continue to pay their dividends. And if not, they can be replaced with a new company that will or does want to continue to pay dividends. The second thing that is actually worthwhile looking at is the expense ratio. So how much does this ETF cost? Now, within an ETF, obviously, an ETF being low cost is one of the big advantages of using them. But the expense ratio, nonetheless, is an important one. You're going to find different ETFs at different cost points. One of the things that is worthwhile making sure that you explore is if there is a difference in the expense ratio, so how much you're going to pay for this ETF, what was the reason behind there being that cost difference? Is it because the makeup is slightly different, or they've selected certain types of companies? Do they have an ESG leaning, for example? Because oftentimes you'll pay a little bit more for ESG leanings within an ETF. So you definitely need to be mindful of the expense ratio. The next thing that you need to be mindful of is the sectors the ETFs is effectively invested in. Now, over the past 2-3 years, we've seen the cost of living crisis, we've had COVID as well, and it is no secret that certain sectors will perform better under certain economic cycles. So, for example, one of the things that I've always spoken about here on this channel is that in recessionary periods, companies that provide the fundamentals for our existence, they generally tend to do well. So within this, you're looking for an ETF that is invested broadly across a number of sectors. The tech sector, for example, may not necessarily be great when you have high inflation and you have recessionary fears. Typically, those kind of companies tend to suffer. So the sector mix of the ETF is a big consideration to make sure that you understand and you explore. And the last thing that is worthwhile paying attention to is the dividend yield stability of this ETF. Now, admittedly, this can be a little bit difficult to do in an ETF if you have 200-300 companies in there. But what I'm going to show you in a moment is how you might be able to give yourself a little bit of peace of mind and certainty by targeting a specific group of companies like the dividend aristocrats, for example. So I'll show you that in a moment. We're going to jump on my phone and we're going to go into the XTB app. I'm going to use their investment plans to show how you might put together a portfolio of ETFs that pay dividends to help you with this notion of £1,000 or whatever amount per month in dividend income from an investment portfolio. Now I'm already in the XTB app and I'm already building an investment plan for this specifically. Now, investment plans is something that XTB have recently launched, and its function is to help people to invest with more focus, with more of a strategy. So for example, for what we're talking about here, we're looking to put in some ETFs with the pure focus of investing in dividend paying companies so we can generate £1,000, or whatever amount it is that you want on a monthly basis. Now, I've already got my investment plan started in here. There is already one ETF in there. As you can see, there's the Vanguard FTSE All World High Yield Dividend ETF. Now, this one is going to be invested globally across different geographical regions, across different sectors. But what I want to do is I want to add maybe just a couple more. And what this will do is it will allow me to set how much do I want in this Vanguard ETF? How much do I want in the other two that we might select? And the great thing about investment plans is that once you've set this, if you were to set up a direct debit for your money just to go into this investment, it will be invested according to the way you set up this plan. So you do all the work up front, and as you send money in, it just gets invested as you intended from the outset. And it's very, very easy to change as we go along. So we've already got the Vanguard ETF in here. I'm going to add one more though. And what I want is I want a dividend paying ETF. Okay, so I'm just going to go do a search here and just search for dividends. Just return here. There's quite a few. Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier on that there is a way that you might be able to target dividend paying companies that have a really good track record. Now, when I think of that, I'm thinking of the Dividend Aristocrats, which are effectively a group of 68 companies that are listed within the S&P 500, which have a track record of increasing their dividend payments to their shareholders every single year for 25 years. These are very well-established companies, and it is quite an illustrious title to be part of the Dividend Aristocrats. Now, within XTB, you have access to the Dividend Aristocrats. You have the SPDR, S&P US Dividend Aristocrats, which is this one right here. I'm going to add that to the portfolio. So when I go next, it's already added in. It's going to ask me to select my allocation between the two that are already in there. For now, I'm just going to equal the allocation, so you've got 50-50. Now we're going to look for one more dividend ETF. So let's just go back in again and have a little search for maybe one more that we can add in. So we've got 3 altogether. Let's see what we can have here. We also have the iShares MSCI World Quality Dividend ETF. So let's select that one. We've now got 3. And let's just say I'm going to equal everything right now. So across the 3, we've got 33% in each of them to give us our full allocation. We've still got 1% left, so we'll tweak this in a moment. But the idea here is that we've now got 3 ETFs. We've got 2 global ETFs, and we've got 1 which is a Dividend Aristocrats. Now, the question will be, how do I want to allocate to this? Now, the Dividend Aristocrats, they are big companies. Yes, they're US based, but they're internationally traded. And internationally, they do business globally across different regions. So I might say, for example, for this one, I want 50% allocation or exposure to the Dividend Aristocrat ETF, and I'm going to reduce the other 2 down to 25. You could do this however you choose, but ultimately within this portfolio, you have to have 100% of your money across all 3. And so this is a good split. This is what I've decided to do. Now, the great thing about this investment plan is, if you're happy with this, yes, you go and tweak it. You can go and have a look at, for example, let's go into the Dividend Aristocrat ETF, and let's have a look at the key facts here. So what we can see here is when you start to have a look at the numbers in terms of the performance, you can see 1 year annualized 8.6%, year to date 5.7%. You can also have a look at the portfolio in terms of the top holdings and the top sectors that they're also invested in. It's really important to go and have a look at this kind of information, have a look at the expense ratio for these things as well, just to make sure that you're completely happy with it. But within the investment plans with XTB, you need to do the research, but you can literally, once you've done it, set your strategy and have that go for you as you would. Now, there are some other considerations to make sure that you are comfortable with whenever you're investing in any way, shape, or form, and that is market volatility. Now, within an ETF, you are diversified because you have a number of companies that you're invested in, for example, right? So within the global ETF, the World MSCI Global ETF, that's going to be invested in a couple of hundred, at least, companies. So when you talk about volatility, yes, there will be volatility on a, I guess, macro, larger scale. The question is, how does that then affect the portfolio? The beauty about having maybe 100, 200 companies is that because you've got it invested across different regions and across different sectors, one sector might be impacted whilst another isn't. So you might have this seesaw effect where they start to offset each other. But market volatility is something that you need to consider and be mindful of, particularly if you're not going down this route and maybe, for example, you're trying to select individual stocks and you're trying to pick maybe 10. If you have all of your dividend exposure in, for example, say the tech sector, we've already spoken about the fact that the tech sector tends to do not as well in high inflation or recessionary periods. So market volatility is definitely a consideration in your strategy. The next one is taxes. Now, for example, if you're investing in the United States, they have dividend withholding tax. You need to be okay with that. You need to be mindful of that. You need to be prepared for the fact that, there may be some taxation rules that you have to be happy with effectively adhering to. And if things like, for example, the dividend withholding tax in the United States, you don't get a choice. You can fill in a W8 Ben form to get a bit of a discount, but the tax is the tax. That's where you got to pay. The last thing to bear in mind is, reinvestment. If you are the kind of person, for example, that is reinvesting their dividends as a long-term investor, as when we look back at those profiles that we spoke about, then reinvesting your dividend can help you compound your returns a little bit better on that long-term spectrum. Could be really, really good for you. But the question really here is, do you need the income? What type of investor are you? If you're an income seeker and you need that income, it is highly unlikely that you're going to be reinvesting your dividends. So you kind of have to know whether this is something that is suitable for you as a strategy. I know that it's attractive because back in 2020, 2021, it was all the rage to talk about dividend investing, passive income. This idea of passive income was quite sexy. The fact that you didn't have to do any work for it, that you could simply put money somewhere and money would magically appear in your bank account. I think when you talk about it from an investing point of view, it doesn't necessarily have that kind of appeal anymore because, as we've already established, £1,000 per month with a 3% dividend yield, you need £400,000 to get there. And so if you are just starting out on your journey, this may not be the right strategy for you. You may be on a path where your strategy is to accumulate wealth, sorry. And so you're going on a growth objective, which means that maybe tech would be great for you. Possibly, who knows? You might be looking to invest in sexier companies and not necessarily these companies that are paying dividends that are slightly more established. So it's really important to understand what your goal is from the outset to be able to pick your investment strategy accordingly. What I would love to know from you guys watching this, and if you've made it this far, thank you very, very much indeed. I appreciate your time and your attention. If you're investing this way, what are kind of your best picks in terms of, your dividend ETFs or even dividend stocks? There's a lot of talk of companies like AT&T, for example, really, really big dividend yield. We used to have a dividend yield, I believe, of over 7%. I haven't checked it recently to see if it's changed or not. But what are your picks? What are you hearing on social media right now? Is this something that you are potentially tempted to explore as a long-term investor who may be looking to build wealth over the course of time, and this idea of reinvesting your dividend and compounding into the future is quite attractive? Let me know down in the comments below. If you do want to check out XTB, it's again, investment plans is their strategy to help people get more focused with their investing. I'm going to leave a link in the description down below. So make sure you just go check it out. It's free to go check out, free to go sign up, have a little play around, and let me know what you think of that too. Cheers.